So in some ways, Numbers is the last book of the Torah. It ends with the Israelites standing at the Jordan River about to enter this land that had been promised to them so many decades ago. And at this moment, Moses, as did Moses, recount each of the places that they had passed through on their journey, from where they began in Ramses in Egypt to where they are now gathered on the steppes of Moab. And his final instruction to the Israelites is the allotment of land to each tribe, with the notable exception of the Levites, who are given 48 cities within the holdings of their cousins. We'll come back to these cities in just a moment. The book of Deuteronomy, which we begin reading next week, as Rabbi Lizzie noted, is mostly Moses' retrospective of their journey. It's nothing new, right? It's actually a recounting. It's his swan song before he passes the mantle of leadership to his successor, Joshua. The book of Numbers is the actual end of our foundational narrative, which tells us how the children of Abraham and Sarah became its own nation, with its own laws and land and language and culture. So among those cities that were assigned to the Levites are 6 arei miklat, or cities of refuge. These are places where someone who has committed involuntary manslaughter, a rotzeach makeh nefesh bishgaga, can flee while waiting adjudication. The reason this person can't stay where they are is that the moment someone is killed, whether intentionally or unintentionally, the mechanisms of justice are put into motion. In Genesis, we read that anyone who sheds the blood of another human, by human hands their blood shall be shed. And in Exodus, one who fatally strikes another shall be put to death. While killing makes one person a murderer, in biblical law, it makes another person, usually somebody related to the deceased, a goel, or redeemer, the person who's responsible for exacting the penalty of this crime, a life for a life. Now, our tradition places the sanctity of human life as the true north of our moral compass. The very first thing that the Torah teaches about humankind is that every single person is a reflection of the divine image. And as such, the preservation of life, what we call pikuach nefesh, supersedes almost every other commandment we're given, which means we can bend or break other commandments in order to save a life. And this is why murder is responded to so quickly, so decisively. It not only breaks the social structures that keep us safe, it's anathema to the ethical claims of our tradition. To this end, many centuries later, the rabbis debate whether we actually ever practiced capital punishment in the first place, and they lay the groundwork for interpreting the prescription of a life for life as a question of how we might assess the value of a life lost, rather than the literal demand for the death penalty. But this reinterpretation only reinforces our tradition's aversion to killing human beings and the necessity of a swift and resolute response to murder, whether premeditated or accidental. So let's return to those cities of refuge. In creating the cities of refuge, however, our tradition also recognizes the need to balance justice with compassion, to see in the murderer a human being who might have unintentionally killed someone, who might have made an understandable, if deeply, deeply unfortunate mistake, if only we understood the context in which the action took place. And this doesn't mean that justice shouldn't be pursued, but that restitution for that crime might look a little different if we only understood more about what happened. So I spent an entire summer at yeshiva studying the Arei Miklat. There is a large section of the Talmud, of that compendium of rabbinic conversations, dedicated to this topic because the rabbis are fascinated by this case. Where do we draw the line between voluntary and involuntary manslaughter, and how do we determine intent? What role does negligence play in assigning responsibility to the person who commits the crime, and when does their context take the blame? Social systems that fail to protect both them and their victim. There's some great photos buried on Facebook of me pretending to chop wood demonstrating the difference between hitting someone on the upswing versus hitting someone on the downswing. These are the minutia that the rabbis become obsessed with. What is the difference in that moment of intent, of negligence, of responsibility? But the difference matters, as do a million other factors when deciding whether the response to taking of one life should be the taking of another. Recognizing complexity, we learn in this case, is not a distraction from the pursuit of justice. It is a necessary part of it. It's comforting to exist in a world of binaries, good and bad, right and wrong, action and consequence. This is the appeal of orthodoxies, religious or social, that give us very strict rubrics to live by. The Goel, the Redeemer in our case, operates within the legal orthodoxy of lex talionis, the fancy word for where a punishment must mimic exactly the offense in kind and degree. You killed someone, so you must be killed. It's black and white, it's very simple. But these orthodoxies can only be maintained in isolation. The introduction of outside elements, like the idea that someone might accidentally kill a person and maybe shouldn't be subjected to capital punishment, causes the system to break down. And so if we want to maintain an orthodoxy of thought or action, these variables must be removed or ignored. I'll use a simpler example. If you believe the earth is flat, you either need to find an alternative explanation for how something can move beyond the horizon, or you just need to look the other way and pretend it doesn't exist. In this moment, it might be tempting, and maybe some other examples came to mind, other communities obsessed with defending their orthodoxies. And these are often examples that we look down on, like flat earthers or TERFs or people who think the election was stolen. But it behooves us, this is a safe space, right? But it behooves us, it is so important to see where we might also have fallen into this trap ourselves. Through the media we consume and the media we avoid, the relationships we keep and the people we don't talk to anymore, who we think of as us and who we think of as them. Even if it was never our intent, even if we think we're smarter than that, each of us lives in echo chambers of our own creation, ones that simplify an overwhelmingly complex and nuanced world. The good thing is that if we are aware of this fact, if we become aware of those that we built, we can start to peer over the edge of these echo chambers at that overwhelmingly complex and nuanced world. Of course, holding complexity cannot be an end in and of itself. We must be cautious about when the call to recognize nuance is used as a cover for apathy or inaction. Those moments, and we've all seen them, maybe even been guilty of them ourselves, when people throw their hands in the air and say something like, "It's too messy. We can't make sense of it. Why even bother trying to fix it?" But we must also be wary when the pursuit for justice forgets to take into account this messiness. And what's messier than our own humanity? It's easy and it's not wrong to follow the impulse of righteous indignation, to see a wrong. And I'm sure we see so much wrong around us and want to fix it. This is the role of the Goel, the Redeemer, who understands that an injustice has happened and restitution must be made. It must be made. But it is much harder to be the person who builds the city of refuge, who balances the pursuit of justice with the need for compassion. And by compassion, I mean the acknowledgement that human beings do things for a reason, but sometimes also make mistakes, that we make choices of our own while also being acted on by forces much larger than us, that we affect those around us as much as we are a product of our environment, that we exist in the context of all that which you live and what came before you. I think people, I couldn't help myself. You think I just fell out of a coconut tree? I think people, and I'll put myself in this category as well, I think people have become very good at being a goel, at being that redeemer, the one who sees an injustice and moves quickly to fix it. This has been a summer of protests, of taking to ballot boxes, calling representatives, taking to the streets. I as well, have become very adept. I'm very good at posting and reposting memes and writing hot takes on current issues or sharing images that force us to bear witness to the brokenness of this world. Our critical voice has been honed and sharpened. And good, it should be. This is a necessary element for creating change. But it's not enough. It's not enough because as we tear down the structures that no longer serve us, as we tear apart systems of injustice, we must also be ready to build the world that we want to live in. And in our pursuit of what is right and what is good, we cannot and we should not risk tearing each other down as well. This is the lesson of the Ari Miklat, the recognition that pursuing justice must occur with and alongside the acute awareness of how messy and complicated human beings are, and even so, how precious and how deserving of dignity and care we are as well. I'm reminded of one of my favorite midrashim, a story that the rabbis tell about the creation of the world. They say that God created the world 3 times. The first time God created the world around the attribute of din, the pursuit of justice. This was a place of action and consequence, of right and wrong, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But this world could not be sustained because there was no room for error and there was no possibility for people to grow, to change. The second time God created the world around rachamim, holding compassion. This was a place of nuance and complexity, of understanding the context in which people operate and make decisions. But this world could not be sustained because no one was held accountable for their actions. And so God creates the world a third time, balancing din and rachamim, the pursuit of justice and holding compassion, placing them in dynamic tension. This is the world that we live in, the world we inhabit. Earlier this week, I joined a group of clergy who had the opportunity to sit down with Tony Preckwinkle, who has served as the president of the Cook County Board of Commissioners since 2010. If that doesn't make sense to you, it's basically the mayor of the county. That was how they simplified it for me. She offered that protest is part of changing the world, a necessary part of changing the world, but it's insufficient. And she shared that her legacy for Cook County is the very unsexy task of having given us a balanced budget. The other half, the other counterpart to protest is collaboration, which is often less appealing, and in our current political environment, so often reviled as traitorous, as we are submitted to orthodoxies of ethical purity where we must align on everything or risk being canceled or cut out. She shared that compromise has been demonized and civility has been denigrated. But that's how things get done. So things get done. And she said, if you got something that is a bit more than what you had before, you still got something. But to only live in the space of protest, to refuse to sit at the table with or march alongside people who do not entirely agree with you, to only see the wrong in people who make mistakes, even grievous mistakes, and not recognize their capacity for redemption, we all get nothing. We have a lot at stake in the months ahead of us. I feel that nervousness. I feel that tension looking ahead. And the call for justice is clear. There is a lot wrong with the world as it is. Whether we look overseas at Gaza, whether we look within our own borders here in this country, whether we look on the street corners where so many sleep without a home, without a place to go. Yet if we become so fixated on what we need to tear down that we forget to look to each other to help us build what comes next, or even tear each other down in the process, we will lose. I believe this is what we can do right now. Help build Arei Miklat, cities of refuge, places where people can make and learn from their mistakes, where people can come to be confused or unsure in a world that demands we stake our claim on every issue of importance, and in that confusion be met with compassion rather than ridicule. Where we can encounter people who may not think like us or post like us or vote like us with curiosity, to learn about the context that shaped them and use our differences to help us better understand the incredible complexity of this world. This is the sacred task of communities like this one. We're doing it right now. Surprise. By sitting in this space together. By sitting in this space together. And coming together like this is a task so essential for the months ahead as we head to that ballot box in November. And no matter what happens that month, we will need these places for many years to come. And so my blessing for each of us, that we answer the call to live in the dynamic tension between din, the pursuit of justice, and rachamim, holding compassion for this world, for each other, and for ourselves as well. Shabbat shalom.